Hey everyone, Corie here, and we are reading through the Bible this year. Today we are recapping all of our assigned reading from Bible Discovery and Bible Discovery TV. So that is Job chapter 4 all the way to chapter 32. We are almost halfway through the Bible. So if you have been following along with me, this is very exciting stuff. Give yourself a pat on the back and let's recap this week's reading. Okay, Job. So already in Job, we've seen the character of Job lose everything that he has. We've seen that it's some sort of a cosmic test between Satan, the accuser, and God over the whether or not the faith that Job has is real. So we know this as the audience, but Job and his friends do not know this in this scenario. So Job's friends, last week, we saw Job's friend come and they mourn with him for 7 days, and then they start to speak, and this is where things start to go south. So we're going to see a big long argument drawn out between these friends, these so-called friends of Job. Okay, so in Job chapter 3, which we read last week, we see Job opening up this discourse here where he curses his birth and he questions, why was I even born if this is what God was going to do to me? And why does God keep me alive when all I want to do is die? I have nothing left. So this was how we ended it in chapter 3. Okay, here we go. Chapter 4 and 5 is this first response of Job's friend, his first friend, Eliphaz. There's 3 guys that we know standing there. There's going to be a 4th one in there as well. But here comes Eliphaz. So Eliphaz is trying to be encouraging to Job. First of all, in chapter 4, he says, you've encouraged people who are going through a hard time. So you have to let your piety towards God and your purity be your confidence and hope, because the innocent and the upright before God do not get destroyed by God. So rest in the fact that you're innocent, you're pure, God's going to bring the situation back around. And then, Eliphaz continues on and he says, the innocent man, he gets spared. But think about this, Job. God doesn't spare the angels from judgment, so he's surely not going to spare man from judgment. So what happened to you only happens to fools. So, Job, you need to appeal to God. God's correcting you. God's going to heal you. And then there's this challenge in verse 27 of chapter 5 in Job where it says, we've examined this and found it to be true. So hear this truth and apply it to yourself, Job. So he's trying to encourage Job to repent and be saved. That's what Eliphaz is doing. So now we're going to look at Job chapter 6 and 7. This is Job's reply. And he is unsatisfied by Eliphaz's response. Job says that he believes that God has caused this suffering. He wants to die so that he won't deny the words of God. That's in verse 10 of chapter 6. So it seems like Job's afraid that his overwhelming suffering is going to lead him to sin against God. So he desires to die because of the situation, but so that he won't sin against God. He also tells Eliphaz, you're no help. That answer does not help me. And he goes, why would I lie to you? I've lost everything. Think about it. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to gain. I'm not lying to you here. So Job maintains his innocence in the sense that he's done everything required of him. Not that he's sinless, but that he's dealt with his sin. And this is going to come up again and again. I want to read to you verses 20 and 21 of chapter 7. It says this is Job. If I have sinned, what have I done to you, you who see everything we do? He's talking to God here. Why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my offenses and forgive my sins? For I will soon lie down in the dust. You will search for me, but I will be no more. So we see this struggling of Job. This doesn't make sense to Job's worldview. The fact that he's suffering, even though he's been trying to follow God with everything that he has. Okay, Job chapter 8, the next friend up to bat, his name is Bildad, and he now takes a crack at what's going on. He says to Job, I'm going to summarize it here. He says, why are you talking like this, Job? God does not pervert justice. And he comes right out and says this. He says, your children died, Job, because of their own sin. And if you make yourself right with God, he will restore you. We know that this is true because it's wisdom that's been passed on from our ancestors. And then he goes on this big rant. And he goes, everything has a cause, Job. Life has a cause. Death has a cause. All who forget God die. And God does not reject the one who is blameless. In other words, you're in this situation for a reason. Repent and be saved. Okay, Job chapter 9 and 10 record Job's response. And his reply is really interesting to this. He does not deny that God upholds the innocent and doesn't reject the blameless, but he takes it from this angle. How can a man truly interact with God when they are on two completely different playing fields? How can I plead my case before God, who I cannot see? I can't perceive him. If he walked by me right now, I wouldn't be able to see him. In verse 14 of 9, it says this, how then can I dispute with him, with God? How can I find words to argue with him? Even though I were innocent, I could not answer God. He's bigger than me. He has more understanding than me, more wisdom. So Job concludes then, because he's in this situation through his life experience, that God sometimes treats the guilty and the blameless the same for reasons that are not clear to Job. This is Job's problem. He goes, I'm innocent, yet I've been destroyed. And as a mortal, I have no business standing before God's greatness. I'm in this conundrum. And Job laments very famously that there's no mediator between him and God. I want to read you verses 32 to 35 of chapter 10. It says this, God is not a mere mortal like me that I might answer him, that we might confront each other in court. If only there were someone to mediate between us, someone to bring us together, someone to remove God's rod from me so that this terror would frighten me no more. Then I would speak up without fear of him, but as it now stands with me, I cannot. So he's lamenting this. He wants to meet God in a legal setting. He wants to know what's going on. He wants to explore this suffering that he's going through. Job then lays out in the rest of the chapter exactly what it is that he wants to say to God, which is really interesting. It boils down to, God, tell me the charges you have against me. Why? Why have I become your enemy? Job truly doesn't understand, and that in itself is a torment for him, on top of all the other sufferings that he's actually physically going through and emotionally going through. Okay, Job chapter 11 is short and sweet. It's a reply from Job's friend Zophar. Zophar is very to the point. And you're gonna see that. He's more to the point, more concise than the other men here. Zophar just comes right out to Job and tells him, Job, you're mocking God, which only proves how sinful you really are. Devote your heart to God and repent, and God will restore you. This is short and sweet by Zophar. It's to the point. You gotta like that, especially in wisdom literature. Okay, so Job then replies for 3 chapters. So we're gonna look at Job 12, 13, and 14 all together. So Job says to his friends and to Zophar, what you're all saying is obvious. I'm not dumb. I am wise like you. But the problem is that what you're saying does not apply in my case. Yes, God is in control of all things. No, I'm not inferior to you. I understand it. I want to speak to God on this matter because he is the only one that knows what's going on here. He goes on this tirade then, Job does, against his friends. He goes, you smear me with lies. You're worthless physicians. Will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Would it turn out well for you if God examined you? This is in chapter 13. And then because of this outrage, he's raging against the injustice that his friends are pouring out on him. His attitude seems to shift here. And he goes on a bit of a rant. I'm going to read chapter 13, verses 13 to 16 for you. And this marks this shift of Job. Keep silent and let me speak. Then let come to me what may. I'm going to speak, and then whatever happens, happens. Why do I put myself in jeopardy and take my life in my hands to speak before God, is what he's saying. Though God slay me, yet I will hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. Indeed, this will turn out for my deliverance. Then Job asks God to withdraw the torment and summon Job to speak with him. Okay, Job chapter 15, back to Eliphaz for another cycle of dialogue, back through the men. Eliphaz basically says, look, your own mouth is condemning you right now. You're proud. You're full of rage. You are a textbook case, Job, of what happens to the wicked man who seems to prosper. And then he suddenly falls and fails because he's wicked, and God gives him what he deserves. Okay, Job 16 and 17 is Job's reply. So Job goes, here we go again with the repetitive arguments. You are miserable comforters. You should be encouraging and bringing relief to me right now. And he then goes on this lament that now, on top of the suffering that God has inflicted on him, now his friends are inflicting even more suffering. And Job actually does something really interesting. He calls on his blood, because he has sores on his body. So he calls on his blood to be a witness for him. You know, this harkens back to Genesis and Cain and Abel when God says, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. It's a witness against you, Cain. Remember that? Okay, so now Job is invoking this. And now Job believes that he does have an advocate in heaven. Job chapter 18, Bildad takes a crack at it again, and I want to read you a quote. He goes, when will you end these speeches? Be sensible, and then we can talk. He goes on and he's like, is the earth to be abandoned for your sake, Job? Must the rocks be moved from their place just because of you? In other words, Bildad is going, you know what, Job? Let's just change all of reality for you. Yeah, no, I don't think so, Job. The reality is simple. You are wicked. We're not going to change our whole paradigm, our whole worldview based on your experience. Job chapter 19. Job is in awe over this in this chapter. He goes, this is unbelievable. It's not enough that God comes after me. That's not enough for you. Now you have to come after me. And verse 22, he goes, why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh? Is the fact that I'm almost dead not enough for you? And then also the famous verse 25 is in here. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. So Job is expectant here. He is now switched from hopelessness to, no, God is just. He is going to speak with me on this issue. He's trusting in God's righteousness. God will stand with Job as if in a court. So this is how we should understand this poetic language from my understanding. Job chapter 20. Zophar again, another short, sweet, simple, to the point. Zophar says to Job, you've dishonored me with your rebuke. Let me describe the wicked to you one more time, and you see how perfectly it describes your situation. And so he does. Job chapter 21, Job is a little bit facetious back, and he goes, listen to me. No. Really, listen to what I am saying, to the words that are coming out of your mouth, and that will be your form of consolation to me. The wicked, here's the problem he sets up for his friends. The wicked do prosper. They do live well on the earth. So how can you console me with your nonsense? Nothing is left of your answers but falsehoods, right? And we do know this even still today. There are people who are wicked in terms of godliness. They don't live after God, and yet they are successful and they live long lives right here on earth. Job chapter 22. Eliphaz gets angry, okay? He now turns from theory into actual accusations against Job. He starts pointing out to Job his supposed sins. He goes, you, Job, you've demanded pledges from your relatives for no reason. You've stripped people of clothing. You did not help the poor or the widows. You persecuted orphans. And if you return to God and remove wickedness, if you repent, then you'll be restored. So after all these accusations, we're going to look at Job chapter 23 and 24 together because Job responds. And at this point, Job seems to disengage from the direct arguments of his friends because they're basically the same. And he more internally begins to summarize the issues as he sees them, but kind of playing off the words of his friends. And here's what I mean. He does a couple really cool things in Job 23 and 24. So Eliphaz had ended his chapter by saying, return to God, Job. And Job begins his response by saying, if only I knew where to find him. And that's in verses 3 and 5. He goes, if only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would find out what he would answer me and consider what he would say to me. So basically he's like, yeah, Eliphaz, I do want to find God, but not in the way that you're saying. Eliphaz also, in his accusations against Job, he said that God would become Job's silver and gold. So Job, you wouldn't be so worried about losing your fortune. God will become your fortune. And Job flips this in verses 10 and 11. He goes, when God has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his steps. I've kept to his way without turning aside. So he's maintaining his innocence, but there's this new determination to stick through this test, whatever this is. Job's starting to see it as a test to find God's justice. So there's this belief that he's being tested. So that's new in this chapter. He goes on to talk about how there's a lot of injustice in this world that God doesn't seem to deal with, like murder, oppression, and kidnapping specifically are mentioned. Then he goes over his friend's position that the wicked always pay for their evil, and he challenges them to prove him wrong. He's like, oh, really? Prove me wrong here, that the wicked don't prosper, because they do. Experience shows us that they do sometimes. Job chapter 25, Bildad kind of takes some cues from Zophar here, and he does a short and sweet chapter. He basically says, Job, no man can be truly righteous before God. Job chapter 26, Job busts out the sarcasm hard. All right, I'm going to read you verse 1 to 4. This is sarcasm through and through, just dripping. How you have helped the powerless. How you have saved the arm that is feeble. What advice you have offered to the one without wisdom. What great insight you have displayed. Who has helped you utter these words? And whose spirit spoke from your mouth? He then goes on to say to Bildad, you can't understand God. Okay, Job 27, Job is continuing on to speak now, but there's something really interesting. Here in chapter 27 and in chapter 29, there's a title that says, and Job continued his discourse. But this interrupts Job speaking. So Job's already speaking, and then it says, and Job continued his discourse. This seems to indicate, given the overall structure of the book, a lot of scholars believe that this is indicating that we're meant to see Job kind of pause to see if Zophar wants to say anything, because in this round of speaking, he hasn't said anything. And Zophar does not want to speak. He's done with this. He's done. So Job seems to pause here once in 27 and once in 29. And when Zophar has nothing to say, Job just continues on speaking. Okay, so in chapter 27, Job repeats his case. God has done this to me. I'm innocent. And he adds this, may my enemies, aka his friends here, be like the wicked. And then Job goes on to quote back all of the terrible things that his friends have said happen to the wicked. So this is pretty brutal. Job 28, Job continues, there's this poem on where can wisdom be actually found. And the summary of the poem is, people go to great lengths and great depths to mine precious gold and minerals from the earth, and yet not even those very precious things can buy wisdom. God alone knows the location of wisdom, and so to fear the Lord, to respect the Lord is wisdom. Chapter 29, Job's final defense. This is a court defense. Begins, and he will sign it, as we will see in the text, okay? So his final defense is, he goes on and he says how much he longs for his life before all of this. He misses it. And he launches a defense talking about all the things that he used to do because they were godly. Things like rescuing the poor, orphans, widows, strangers, etc. Okay? Job chapter 30 to 31 continues on and he goes, but now these people that I helped, that I spent my life helping, now they mock me and everything's terrible. I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. And then he goes through the things that he specifically did to follow God. He says, I made a covenant with my eyes not to lust because God sees everything. I didn't lie or deceive because God. I did not deny justice to servants or show partiality to anyone because the same God formed me and the other person in the wombs of our mothers. We're the same. Humans are the same. Humans are equal. I did not reject the poor, the widows, the fatherless, but I helped them with material possessions like food and clothing, overall societal help. And I dreaded, he goes, because I dreaded destruction from God, which is what happened, right? He took this idea of responsibility before God very seriously. I did not trust in wealth or worship idols, he said. I did not rejoice in my enemies' misfortune or curse their lives. He said, no stranger had to spend the night in the street. My door was always open. So he spent his material wealth on good things. And in verse 33, here is where he signs this. He writes his defense and he signs it. If I have concealed my sin, as people do, by hiding my guilt in my heart, because I so feared the crowd, and so dreaded the contempt of the clans that I kept silent. And then I'm going to skip ahead here. Oh, that I had someone to hear me. I sign now my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser put down his indictment in writing. Surely I would wear it on my shoulder. I would put it on like a crown. I would give him an account of my every step. I would present it to him as to a ruler. Okay, so this is Job's, please God, answer me. Tell me what I've done wrong. And this final thing that he says, I did not even abuse the ground or the soil by overworking it or being unfair to my tenant farmers. Okay, the last chapter we're going to look at today, chapter 32. In comes another character that we didn't realize was here, a young man named Eliphaz. He is very angry, first of all, at Job, because Job justified himself rather than God. And then he's angry with the three friends because they hadn't found a way to refute Job, but they had still condemned him. They had still cursed him, even though they didn't know what was going on. So to the men, Eliphaz says, your words have failed, and I won't use your arguments, even though you're my elders and you're supposed to be smarter than I am. And then he goes on and he goes, wisdom doesn't come from age. It actually comes from God. And I feel compelled to speak. This idea like God's compelling me to speak. And I will show no partiality based off of age or situation or anything like that. And so this is the beginning of Eliphaz's speech. And next week, we're going to talk about what that speech is. He's promising big things. I'm not sure that it's going to deliver, but we're going to find out. All right, leave me some comments and questions down below about the book of Job. Anything that popped up this week that you need help with, a point in the right direction. I will try my best to help you. I hope you're having a really good time, and I hope you're enjoying Job. It's a different kind of biblical book, isn't it? Have a good one.